This has been going on for months now. I've told my parents, teachers, even some people from church, but no one believes me. My best friend Sarah avoids me now, and I just don't know what to do anymore. What started as a fun little game has become something that's constantly haunting me. I can barely sleep because something has been watching me wherever I go. A few months ago, it was a Friday night. Sarah slept over at my place to do some homework and catch up. We've been friends since middle school. We were like sisters, and we were neighbors too, so you couldn't find us separate. When we went into high school, we had separate classes, but we still found time to hang out. After we finished our schoolwork, we concluded the night with a movie. We usually did some rom-coms, but that night we decided on a horror movie. Do you think that stuff really works? Sarah blurted out. What are you talking about? Ouija boards. Do you think you can actually talk to something? To be honest, I'm a scaredy cat. I was already afraid of the movie, so her talking about that made me more anxious. Oh, yeah, probably. I wouldn't want to try, I said nervously. Come on, Maddie, let's try it out, Sarah said excitedly. No way. Look at this movie. I'm not calling bad spirits over. You're no fun, she joked. We finished the movie and she ended up sleeping over. It was at some point in the middle of the night where I felt a hand on my shoulder. It startled me, and right when I was about to scream, a hand went over my mouth. It was Sarah. She started giggling and slowly moved her hand away. What the heck, Sarah? I shouted in a whisper. Relax, she giggled. I'm sorry, I just couldn't resist. What's going on? What time is it? It's almost 3 in the morning. I couldn't fall asleep, so I got on my phone and did some research. She whispered, my God, go to bed. I couldn't believe her. I started to turn over to go back to sleep, but she stopped me. Wait, please, it'll be so fun, I swear. She cries, what do you want? Please let me sleep. She pushed her phone towards my face. Its light blinded me for a moment. I winced a bit, but after a moment my eyes focused on the results of her search. Sarah was looking up Ouija boards and how to make one. I wasn't sure which to feel first. Fear or frustration with her waking me up. I insisted that she go back to bed, and while she complained and begged, my resolve to go back to sleep unwavered. The rest of the weekend was uneventful, and when the next Friday came, Sarah was waiting for me at my locker. She insisted that we go hang out at her place that night. It's been a while, so I agreed. We got on the bus, and on our stop, we went straight to her house. When we got inside, her dad was on the phone in the kitchen. He saw us and mouthed, Hey, Sarah's dad is really kind. He was a banker or something, and her mom is a nurse. After Sarah and I became friends, our parents became close as well, so I considered her parents my family. We ran to her room and she shut the door behind her. You won't believe what I got my hands on, she said mischievously. My heart sank as she removed a box from her closet. It was a Ouija board. How in the world did you get that? She grinned. I begged my dad to get me one. You guys are monsters, I said in disbelief. You can't escape. My house is right over there. I can just leave. She gave me a tight hug. No, please, it'll be so much fun. Come on. After a moment I gave in. Let's finish up our schoolwork first. After we finished our homework, Sarah's dad called us over for some pizza. He asked us what we were up to that night, and Sarah told him about using the Ouija board. He laughed as he told us not to get too loud. He grabbed a couple of slices of pizza and retreated into his office close to Sarah's room. Sarah rushed us through our dinner, and she insisted that we stayed up till 1 in the morning to start the ritual. We passed the time with watching videos. It put me slightly at ease until the appointed time came. I couldn't believe we were actually doing something so dumb. Sarah cleared some space on the floor and opened the board. The board wasn't like a plastic one you'd see at stores every nowadays. It looked like an antique. It was wooden with dark brown edges. Honestly, it was quite beautiful. Sarah pulled out some candles and placed them onto her desk. She turned off her bedroom light and the flickering flames dimly lit the room. She placed a wooden triangle onto the board. Its round glass center reflected the light of the candles. Sarah could hardly contain her excitement. She placed her hands onto the planchette, hurrying me to do the same. I placed my hands onto it. It was oddly cold. Now one of us should ask the questions. Sarah said, "You should do it." "No way," I screamed. "Silence, you'll wake up my father." She hushed. "Come on, it'll be more fun if you do it." I don't even know what to freaking ask. "Just ask it, whatever," she laughed. I didn't want to go along with her plans, but she went through all this trouble to set this up. She was so determined to do this, and I felt a bit bad if I denied her fun, so I agreed to questions. So we took the planchette underneath our hands and began to move it in circles on the board. The sound of it sliding across the wood echoed throughout the room. We slid the planchette onto the center of the board, and I took a deep breath. "Hello, is there anyone here with us?" I asked. My heart started to race. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Right when I felt a bit at ease at some silly game, the planchette began to move. Sliding towards, yes. I looked at Sarah and she was grinning from ear to ear, her eyes transfixed onto the board. "Please stop joking, Sarah," I whispered, but her gaze was stuck onto the planchette. Are you a ghost?" Sarah snickered at the question and the planchette slid over towards no. My heart began to beat so fast. "What do you mean, no? What are you?" The planchette started to feel like it was burning cold onto my fingertips. Then I felt it move again. It started to move towards DEVI. Before it could finish, I screamed and shuffled backwards away from the board. Sarah was laughing so hard at my terror. "What the heck, Sarah? Why would you scare me like that?" I screamed. She laughed for a bit and her face got serious. "Come on, Maddie. Stop joking around." "I'm not joking. I wasn't doing it." Her face became a deadpan. "I wasn't moving it. I thought you were." Sarah's dad knocked on the door. "Are you girls okay in there?" We looked at each other for a moment and shook ourselves. "Yes, Dad, we just scared ourselves using that board." Sarah laughed. A long sigh could be heard from beyond the door. "Well, alright then. Try and go to bed, it's getting late." "Yes, sir," we both replied. We turned on the lights and blew out the candles. Sarah was putting up the Ouija board, but she had a look of worry on her face. "Are you okay?" I asked. Sarah looked at me and she seemed reluctant in saying it. We didn't say goodbye. I was confused at what she said. "What do you mean?" "You're not supposed to remove your hands until you say goodbye to the spirit. They say we open a portal by using the board and saying goodbye closes it." "I've had enough, Sarah. Please let's go to sleep now," I said. So we put up everything and turned in for bed. We both shared her bed and tried to go to sleep, but what she said unsettled me. Sarah's bed was in a corner close to her desk and a window, and as she slept inside towards the wall, I was on the outside. I pulled the blanket over my face and hoped the sound of Sarah's breathing would lull me to sleep, but I couldn't get tonight's event out of my head. There was no way we were talking to something. There was no way it was the devil. This was all just a prank that Sarah was pulling on me. I closed my eyes and tried my hardest to go to sleep, but that was when I heard something coming from outside Sarah's window. It was the sound of heavy footsteps walking our way, leaves and grass crunching underneath. I was terrified. I was just imagining things. The Ouija board was just putting crazy thoughts in my head. I closed my eyes tight, and then I heard heavy breathing right outside of the window. I didn't know what else to do. The breathing was so deep and haggard, but it was definitely real. I slowly removed the blanket from my face and peered out of the corner of my eyes towards the window. My heart sank as I saw something through the cracks of her blinds. Someone or something was outside of the window looking at us, looking at me. For a moment I swear we made eye contact, and I heard a low breath shudder. I'll never forget those eyes. They were dark and sullen, but the way they curved it looked like they took delight in seeing me squirm. A toothy grin. Its teeth parted open and a tongue came out to lick its cracked lips. A low, hushed laugh broke the silence, followed by a strange noise. Click. That was when I let out a blood-curdling scream with all my might. Sarah jumped up and shouted, "What's going on?" The devil is outside your window," I told her. My throat hurt from the scream. A moment later, Sarah's dad flung the door open and looked at us. We were absolutely terrified. I explained to him what was going on and he opened the window blinds and peered out. "Give me a minute." He reassured us and ran out of the bedroom. We heard the sound of the front door open. A few minutes passed and he returned. He was covered in sweat and he was out of breath. He said he ran around the house and looked at the streets and didn't see anything. You said you saw someone outside. I looked at him for a moment. I didn't want to sound crazy and tell him I saw the devil outside. I'm not sure. I just saw someone looking in from the window. I told him, "Hey, why don't we sleep on the couch tonight?" Sarah suggested. We spent the rest of the night on the couch. I tried to sleep, but the memory of those eyes kept me awake. Every time I tried to go back to sleep, I could hear that laugh echo through my skull. The way it licked its lips made my skin crawl. The following morning, Sarah's mom came home and made us breakfast. She worked the night shift as a nurse, but she loved having me over. Sarah's dad brought up what happened last night, and her mom chastised us for playing such a stupid game. After breakfast, I gathered my things to go home. Sarah was worried about me, but maybe her mom was right, and it was just in my head. As I left their home and walked towards mine, I thought I heard that low laugh again. When I got home, my parents asked the usual, "Did I have fun? How were the parents doing?" I went to my room and crashed onto my bed. It unsettled me a bit because I had my room set up similarly to Sarah's, and I looked towards the window. I jumped and pressed my back to the wall. I saw a set of dark eyes looking through the window at me. I ran towards the window and fully opened the blinds. But nothing was there. My mom came rushing in to check on me. I was out of breath, sweating, but I assured her that I was just tired. This went on for a couple of days into weeks. Every night I made sure that our windows were shut tight. My dad thought I was being paranoid. I told them what I was seeing, but they brushed it aside as some delusion. I even told Sarah that almost every time I looked out the window I would see the devil looking at me and smiling at me. She also tried to brush it off like I was trying to scare her, but I was the one that was afraid. I could barely sleep. The devil was out to get me. Every night I would see him and hear that damn noise. Click. No one believed me. I wasn't sure what to do. My mom thought I was trying to set the house on fire when I started burning sage at home. Why did I agree to do the fucking Ouija board? Last Friday is what broke me. My parents asked me to stay home and watch the house while they go out with Sarah's mom because she had an off day. Sarah was feeling sick, so she couldn't come over, but they told me her dad would be home. They assured me if anything happens, call them, but if there's an emergency, call Sarah's dad. When the night came, I was so nervous. It felt like those eyes were everywhere. I was on the couch in the living room. I turned on a rom-com to put my mind at ease. The sound of the comedic dialogue was fading into the background into a muffle as I curled into a ball and looked around me. It was around 8 p.m. when I decided to check the windows for the 100th time. The living room windows were locked. I peered out and was met with darkness. The small window in the kitchen was locked. My parents' bedroom window was locked. My mom's office room window was locked. We had a large sliding glass door to the backyard. It was unlocked. I peered out and saw a dark shape standing there in the darkness. I freaked out. I struggled to lock the sliding door and ran when I heard the lock click. I ran to my bedroom, but I turned to see the shape on the sliding door. Its face was pressed against the glass and those eyes reveled in my horror. Bile began to rise from my gut as a tongue began to lick the glass. Tears filled my eyes. The devil was so close, but I couldn't make out any features. It was just dark and looming. I ran into my bedroom and slammed my door. I darted towards my desk where my phone was charging. I fumbled it a bit, but when I almost caught it, my phone fell to the floor. Something was banging on my window. It was so hard I was surprised the glass didn't shatter. I picked up my phone and called my father. "Hey," my father answered. Daddy, please, come home. Someone's outside and they're trying to get in." I yelled. "What? I can barely hear you." "Someone's there." "Here, let me call Sarah's dad." The line went dead. My heart was racing and then the banging on the glass stopped. That was the moment my heart sank. I heard a noise, a familiar noise, the sound of a phone vibrating. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Oh, hey John, what did you say?" The voice was low and whispering. "Yeah, no problem, just give me a minute and I'll call you back." I slowly walked towards the window. I couldn't believe it, but I had to see. In the cracks of the blinds, I saw him, Sarah's dad, standing outside my window. He looked in my direction, but I don't think he could see me. I saw him grin, then lick his lips and started to walk away. A minute later, I heard a banging from the front door. I ran towards it and looked through the peephole. Sarah's dad was beyond the door. His eye was peering through the peephole too. "Madison, open the door," he said in an interesting voice. "Your dad wants me to check up on you. Let me see that pretty face." I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to open the door. He sneered. He began to beat on the door. He started to shout, "Let me see you, sweetie." I ran back to my phone and I did the only rational thing. I called the police. A soothing voice answered. The devil is outside. The devil is my friend's dad." A few minutes later, the police came by. I heard Sarah's dad talking to them. "I don't know what's going on. My neighbor just called me to check on their daughter because she is alone and I think she's going crazy. Someone call the ambulance. She's probably on drugs or something," he told the police. When I opened the door, I told the officers what was going on, but they didn't believe me. My parents rushed home and they couldn't believe what was happening. They thought I snapped. Sarah was sick. She weakly walked out and she asked me what was going on, but all I could say is that her dad was the devil that's been watching me. She looked at me, confused, concerned, weirded out. The police didn't go further into it. My parents were embarrassed at my accusation. Sarah's mom was angry with me and Sarah and she stopped talking to me. It's been a while since that day, and everyone thinks I'm crazy. Everyone calls me the devil girl and keeps their distance from me. Sarah stopped talking to me and my parents were so ashamed that they insisted on us moving. We're packing up our things now and I just wanted to tell someone. Hopefully someone will believe. I looked out the window and saw something taped to the glass. I ran out and saw that it was an envelope on my window. I opened the envelope and saw dark and blurry pictures of me through my window. I looked around frantically and saw him, the devil, Sarah's dad, staring at me through his own window. He waved at me and I saw a little note behind one of the photos. "I'll see you again, sweetie." "Go on in there," the duty sergeant sneered. "Let's see what you learned in college." I was 20 years younger than the youngest guy in the department, and it showed. Even so, the way the duty sergeant threw me at the strangest and most dangerous cases had long since crossed the line from harassment and turned into something more menacing. I realized the rest of them wanted me to fail. They didn't like guys like me. Young guys. Guys who asked questions, who did things by the book. It cramped their style. They wanted their old boys club back, even if that meant me getting my throat torn out. They'd all seen and probably done worse. I could see it in their eyes. Still, there didn't seem to be anything particularly threatening about the short auburn-haired girl in the interrogation room. Her thick black glasses and pale skin made me think of a young librarian, but I knew better. I'd seen the photos. I knew what she was capable of. "Hi, I'm Detective Maxwell." My eyes didn't leave her for a minute as I sat down well out of reach. "Detective?" Katie laughed nervously. "Why detective?" I already explained everything to the man at the hospital. That man was a psychiatrist. I'm a police officer. Because your friends are deceased, it's important to establish exactly what happened between April 24th and May 10th on the eudaimonia. Can you explain those events to me as you remember them? Katie. Deceased. There was surprise in her wide green eyes. Could it be that she really didn't know? Dead, of course they are. Katie buried her head in her arms. Things like this have followed me my whole life. You know, she wept. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to her comment. Stay with me, Katie, I said. I know this must be difficult for you, but the only way forward is for you to tell me exactly what happened on April 24th. Nick, Simone, Terry, who, and me. We met in a classics class. In college, the professor was a real dick. He'd write on the board with one hand and erase with the other, and he'd fail you if you used a bibliography format he didn't like. Anyway, the five of us bonded and were friends ever since. We always thought it would be cool to take a trip to the Greek islands, see the place where all that ancient stuff happened. You know, This year we finally got our chance. Katie took a deep breath. She kept glancing at the manila folder on the table. I wasn't ready to show her the pictures. First I had to hear as much of her story as I could, establish a rapport, and then it would be time for the real questions. It was Terry who had the idea of renting a sailboat. I understand Terry Blankenship had some sailing experience. Twice, with his uncle, on a fishing boat, but the boat we rented had, 4 cabins and 2 sails. It was way out of his league. When you say the boat, you are referring to the Eudaimonia. Correct. Katie nodded. There's been some suggestion that Terry rented the boat from a small local outfit because he knew that he didn't have the license or experience a more reputable firm would have demanded. What do you think about that? He just wanted to impress Simone. Katie shrugged. The water looked so still. We didn't think anything bad would happen. Nick, the guy at the marina, he saw Terry's credit card and knew right away he was loaded. Once he saw it, I don't think he cared if we came back with the boat or not. It was an unusually long time before the authorities were alerted. I admit it, but let's not get out of order. You were telling me about your first day at sea. It was beautiful, Katie said. You've never seen anything so blue. Little white houses, tiny islands off in the distance. Getting tan on the deck with a guy I had a crush on since sophomore year. It was like a dream. Until the storm blew up. When was this? That was the second day. So, April 25th. We just finished the dinner Who Cooked in the galley, and we were getting a card game set up below deck without too much enthusiasm. We were all pretty plastered from another long day of drinking in the sun. That's probably why we didn't notice that the water had started to move differently. By the time we realized, the rain was coming so hard and fast we couldn't see. Nobody knew how to prepare the boat, and Terry, he couldn't even take in the sail. It's alright, I reassured her, leaning farther forward than I probably should have. I know this is hard. What happened next? We capsized. Katie shrieked, and I jumped. I just remember holding on for dear life while these huge frothy black waves slammed against the boat again and again. Nick and Who were yelling something. Terry got desperate. He cut the sail free. Then a wave righted us again, and it went on. Katie sniffed. We huddled in the wet interior, waiting to get flipped again, praying for dawn. When it finally came, there was nothing but water all around. All our supplies was gone. The GPS, the safety devices and backups. They were missing or broken. I've never felt so lost. A person can get pretty desperate in a situation like that. We handled it pretty well for the first day. We tried to make signals, fix the equipment, and fish. There was that vague smile again. The one that darkened so quickly. Everything gets blurry after that, Katie mumbled. Maybe it was the hunger or thirst, but I can't. Sorry, what I'm trying to figure out here, Katie, I cleared my throat, is how you managed to survive 14 days adrift in a boat without food or water. I need you to remember what happened to the others, Katie. She wrinkled her forehead doubtfully. I took the first picture out of the manila folder. It showed the walls of a ship's cabin, gouged deep with fingernail marks, and a door ripped brutally from its hinges. For example, how did this happen? I asked. Katie shrugged. I produced another photo. Another cabin, the bedding shredded, the walls splattered with blood. That's our ship. Katie seemed to recognize it for the first time. I'd saved the most disturbing for last. The gnawed upon bones of Terry, Simone, Who, and Nick, scattered around the galley. Katie brought a hand to her mouth. When the medics found you and pumped your stomach, they found the remains of your friends. I need to understand how that happened. I told you, Katie said, suddenly cold. I'm cursed. She pushed the photos back across the table at me. When this happened, I guess hunger and thirst had already weakened me so much that I couldn't fight it off. What is it? My shadow. You're saying your shadow made you do this. I leaned back and crossed my arms, wondering if she'd step into my verbal trap and admit that she'd torn apart and eaten her friends. Look at me. Katie held up her scrawny arms and delicate fingers. Do I look like I could rip a door off of its hinges, or break through a wall, or eat someone piece by piece? You tell me. She clammed up. I changed ideas. Tell me more about your shadow. My dad always used to say that he'd made some powerful people very angry, and that one day they'd get him back. I was just a kid back then, and I didn't associate his warning with the creepy lady who offered me a gold coin for 13 strands of my hair. By the time I told my parents what happened, it was too late. My shadow had begun to change. It whispers to me, tells me to hurt, to let it take over. Usually I fight it off, but sometimes, when I'm really struggling, I give in. And the consequences are terrible. There's a reason why Terry, Simone, who, and Nick were my first real friends since grade school. Nobody wanted to hang out with the girl. Katie, I began. Have you ever been checked for mental illness? I bit off a girl's ear. What do you think? She hesitated. But this is different. I'm fine, unless my shadow takes over. Can you let your shadow take over now? I asked, fascinated. You wouldn't survive it. It's time for us to lay everything out on the table. Katie, I stood sternly, my hands on my hips. You're facing a very long prison sentence for the murders of your friends. We have evidence from under your fingernails, your teeth, and even from inside your stomach. Unless you can show me who was really responsible. You really want to know. Katie's voice became a throaty rumble that seemed to shake the walls of the interrogation room. The camera stopped working. Katie's shadow was nowhere to be seen in the flickering fluorescent light. Then open your eyes. She stood, snapping the chains on her wrists, and as if they were made of straw. I bolted before she could reach me, and I was greeted by the laughter of the duty sergeant and the others outside. Scared of a little girl, college boy, he joked. The duty sergeant could tell by my pale face that something was going on, but when the other officers flung the door open, we were treated to a vision of Katie, looking calm and a little confused in her chair. The duty sergeant gave me a wry smile, but it faded pretty quick when he saw that Katie's chains were broken. By the time my hands stopped shaking long enough to finish a styrofoam cup of watery coffee, and I made my way back to the interrogation room, Katie was gone, removed from my safety, the duty sergeant claimed, but in my dreams I still see the narrow windowed metal door to Katie's interrogation room, swallowed by a living shadow. The case of the eudaimonia was like a splinter in my brain, and when I finally got the time and seniority I needed to dive into that rabbit hole, I didn't like what I was waiting for me in the archives. Katie was found guilty, of course. That was only normal, given the amount of evidence against her. But there was nothing normal about what happened around her in prison. The abusive male guard who was found leaning dead against the cold concrete wall opposite of Katie's cell with his eyes scorched out of his skull. The sadistic inmate who simply disappeared until what was left of her was found clogging the toilet of the cell she'd shared with Katie. The blackout in the shower room, the screams as the guards fought to open the door, the bloody torrent running down the drain from the shattered shower heads, the broken bodies heaped around where Katie crouched, rocking back and holding herself, tears streaming down her cheeks. Unexplained transfers and gruesome incidents followed Katie wherever she went, almost like a shadow. I know I shouldn't be obsessing over old cases. It's a bad path to start down, the kind that only tends to lead to the bottom of a bottle. Problem is, the last time I checked Katie's file, there was a new note. She has been released. I wonder who her shadow will touch next. You have Googled yourself at some point or another. Admit it. There's nothing shameful about it. It's not worse than what I did. I searched my name on the dark web. Don't ever make that same mistake. I was 19 years old then. Liv and her family were kind enough to let me live in their guest bedroom at the start of that year. They liked the fact that I could fix most of their computer problems. Liv is a great person, and what she saw in a hacker who could never survive for long in the 9-to-5 world is beyond me. Their house was in a suburb only a few blocks away from a library and coffee shops with free Wi-Fi. These locations were convenient for my burgeoning career as a digital outlaw. I used those resources until I was able to move out and get a small apartment of my own. After a string of demeaning jobs and abusive bosses, I found financial independence. I did this after I learned how to buy and sell things I shouldn't with the use of my Tor browser. I engaged in illegal transactions such as ordering counterfeit money and stolen IDs. I discovered there was a large market for manufactured psychedelics. I often went to the skate park to sell those items off the beautiful landscape of the World Wide Web. Business was good. A young man with years spent in foster care, I sought out activities which gave me a sense of control. A childhood of not having any will do that to you. The ability to navigate the online world to get almost whatever I wanted afforded me a sense of power. It was going well until one evening in July. I sat on the second level of a Barnes & Noble bookstore in a corner next to the self-help section. I always did my best work there. The place was starting to go under and I did not have to worry about an influx of patrons. Despite having a disguised IP address, I never wanted to risk a raid at home. The items were always shipped to a P.O. box instead of my unit number as well. In retrospect, these were all flimsy safety measures. They still gave me a sense of comfort, even if they were a bit delusional. I made sure there were not any cameras mounted near where I sat down. It was a small space out of the way of the general public. Hiding in plain sight was always my preferred method. After 15 minutes of searching, I grew bored. I entered in my name, Joshua Wells. An input of my identity on that part of the web should be an indicator of how successful and arrogant I had become. I did not expect Wikipedia to be among the results, but it was the third link down. The first one involved a ghost tour in New Jersey. The guide had a similar name. The second was a gore website I was not interested in. While I may have been a thrill seeker, I was not out to consume media which capitalized on hurting others. I clicked on the third article link because of the title. It was about a television show. It read The Short Life of Joshua Wells. At first the title did not startle me, since there are plenty of others with the same name. Recaps of 10 episodes were on the page. The first paragraph illustrated how the series did not continue past season 1. I read the summary of the first episode for the sake of passing time. Episode 1. Joshua's father is a known and feared gang member. His mother is a helpless addict. She attempts to use their own son as a drug mule on a plane flight from Boston to California. She has hopes of making a profit by dealing narcotics to a major criminal enterprise on landing. The authorities intercept them. Their son goes with CPS. He goes to a safe harbor for kids. The synopsis struck me as very close to home. Who wrote or directed the show was not listed, but it did state the air date. The month and year given matched the era when an identical set of circumstances had befallen me. The name of the center I went to was even called Safe Harbor. I was too young to remember much, but the facts were precise. I gulped and tried to shrug it off as an unusual coincidence. I read the second episode summary. Episode 2, we follow Joshua on his 15th birthday. He goes to a juvenile detention facility for the first time after he attacks a teacher by throwing a desk at him. Although he missed, the instructor still presses charges since he did not like the student much. He befriends a troublemaker on the inside named Ian. They escape, but not before a massive brawl with the other teens ensue inside of the facility. It ends with the two captured. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. It was uncanny to me how similar the events were to my own experiences. A slight blur overtook me, but I went on to the third, unable to keep my eyes from skimming. Episode 3, Joshua is free. Joshua decides to break and enter an old man's upper-class home after scouting the place for days. His goal is to take the many Rolex watches from the top drawer of the old man's dresser. When he enters the house, Joshua discovers how the owner did not take his vacation cruise trip as planned. The man was asleep in his bedroom until Joshua wakes the victim by accident. Joshua runs away. He gets chased by the homeowner outside. where the elderly male dies of a heart attack in the street. I felt my chest tighten. It was all true, but I had never shared that story with anyone before. It was one of my most guilt-ridden memories. I read the next two. Episode 4. Joshua has nightmares of the old man crawling out of a ditch and choking him to death. He complains about night terrors to one of his counselors, who recommended a doctor. He ends up selling anti-anxiety pills after he does not like the way they make him feel. A girl he asks out overdoses and goes to the hospital. While she survives, he feels terrible, but not enough to stop dealing. He takes his earnings and buys a PC. He takes lessons on how to breach other people's privacy from a group of credit card thieves he met in a mall. Episode 5. Joshua discovers the dark web. He uses it to hustle low-level street drugs at first. Later reads headlines about some of his accomplices getting arrested. He still continues to engage in illicit activity. I looked at the air date for episode 6. It was the 24-hour period I was going through. Episode 6. Joshua goes into a bookstore to poach their internet and to try and make some money. He does not realize there is a man with a shaved head and a Carhartt t-shirt below him perusing the sci-fi aisle. The stranger is actually an undercover FBI agent. The government worker has a microphone and camera attached beneath his shirt. He is surveying for the perpetrator. Even though he has not singled out who he is looking for yet, an arrest commences where they tackle, punch, and taser Joshua. They place him in handcuffs. My hands shook. I stood, gripped an Eckhart Tolle volume to appear less conspicuous, and opened it. I leaned my head over the railing to stare at the ground floor below me. A man who matched the description given by the article was there. His shirt was baggy and hid what I knew to be a gun on his hip. He held a paperback in his hands. I took out my phone. I pretended to have a conversation with an imaginary business partner about stocks. I folded the laptop with my free hand and went down the escalator. I strolled towards the back where there were stacks of hardcover tomes on history. I found an unsecured door and walked through it. I was in the warehouse. Unopened boxes were stacked all around. I did not spot any workers and made a run for a rear entrance. I sprinted down a wide alleyway between the building and rows of motels. I passed an art gallery and liquor store before my heartbeat slowed. Along the way, I found a closed vegan restaurant called Valenti's Eatery. The place was black on the inside, but its neon sign still glowed. A picnic table sat on the lawn out front. I stationed myself there. I opened the laptop again and connected to their free Wi-Fi without issue. I scanned the rest of the chronology. The remaining episodes were all future time periods. I wiped perspiration away from my forehead as I read the rundown of the next episode. Episode 7. Labeled a dark net market operator in the media. 3 of the 7 charges thrown at him lead to convictions. This includes conspiracy to traffic narcotics. He gets out early after he agrees to cooperate with different agencies. He becomes a consultant for cybersecurity awareness and a social engineering expert. Following a keynote speech given out of town, he comes home. His girlfriend Livia and her family have been murdered. My eyes strained and I felt my breath grow shallower. Episode 8. Joshua navigates her house. The walls had dried blood. Every corner's vandalized. Livia's throat is slit. Her body is over the couch in the living area. Her parents had socks stuffed in their mouths and deep stab wounds on their stomachs. Joshua calls the police. He's treated as the #1 suspect in the media for days on end. He is finally cleared, but the psychological damage is too much to bear. I pondered the words. Though I was still young, it is true that Liv meant everything to me. Episode 9. Joshua goes to psychiatric ward. He stares at the padded walls as though they will converse with him. Detectives do visit him with the hopes of gleaning some kind of further information. They tell him they know the aftermath of the massacre he stumbled upon was the work of an active serial killer. The murderer has remained unidentified. Episode 10. Joshua leaps out the window. He breaks his ankle. An adrenaline dump allows him to move across the field and onto the nearest highway. He goes out into traffic. A long-haul truck careens around him and takes out a line of vehicles. He goes to the nearest lake, where he weighs his own pockets down with stones. He waits until nightfall and walks out into the abyss. The last image we see is his hand breaking the surface of the water. Starlight glints on his skin before his fingers submerge below the surface. His last few gulps of water create pockets of bubbles which rise to the top. I absorbed what the rest of my existence would look like. 4 black SUVs pull up and circle around me in the parking lot. Men in black suits and the undercover agent from the bookstore ran at me. Even though I did not resist, they still threw me to the ground. They dislocated my shoulder and kicked me in the jaw a handful of times before they cuffed me. I did get time reduced in prison, after I agreed to cooperate to catch people like me. After my release date, I have tried to revisit that link without luck. I failed to understand how that article existed in the first place. I have read how high-level stress can open up insights and portals into the unknown. I would bank on the latter, though sometimes I think it isn't for me to know. I don't want to give into what destiny has written for me. My escape from the bookstore has given me confidence that I can change the outcome of the dark web's prophecy, even if only for a little while. Or did I only extend the inevitable for a fraction of time? Especially in regards to our stories as individuals, is not written in stone. It is malleable, I tell myself. This positive thought is the only thing which keeps me going. I should visit Liv's house now. She has not answered my texts all morning. I was picked on heavily when I was a kid. At first glance you can easily see why. Arms as thin and weak as spaghetti. A freckled face and glasses perched perilously on my nose. Physically I couldn't fight back, and I didn't have the wits to come up with clever retorts. I was shunned by both boys and girls. They laughed and mocked. They took cruel pleasure in watching me curl up into a rock on the field, whimpering like a scared animal, while hurling punches or squealing insults. Naturally, I preferred being at home, where it was safe and where I could hide. My loving parents encouraged me to stand up to them, to fight back. Though when I tried, everything seemed to go incredibly wrong. So over time I just gave up, withdrew into myself like a turtle in its shell. I also had a particular fondness for stuffed animals. My parents traveled a lot, and when they came back they often brought gifts. Especially in my younger years, I remembered every country they came from and gave them names based on them. Keisha the lion from Kenya, Francis the polar bear from France. When I was 8 or so the bullying was at its peak. I wept in my room, amongst the comfort of my stuffies who smiled at me sympathetically as the bedsheets grew increasingly wet with tears. I was praying to God, but I knew God wouldn't answer my prayers, so I decided to make my own God. I got out my crayons and a piece of paper and tried to imagine what my God will look like. It was difficult, and my 8-year-old mind took to whipping tentacles and a face that was hidden by the clouds. I drew and redrew, scrapped and tried again. The result was something I was really happy with. My red crayon was almost in stubs, but I had seen with my mind's eye a beast with a demonic face and bushy mane and horns, thin spaghetti arms like mine, and tentacles instead of legs that whipped and snapped. His 3 eyes leered out at me through the drawing. I named him Hamaglob. I carried the picture to the top of my bed and pinned it up, and then I arranged my stuffed animals like how I had seen in church. The evening was slanting in, and my room was bathed in red and gold from the dying sun. I stared at the picture above my bed and prayed for peace and safety. What followed was silence, the respectful kind of silence like in church. It was a solemn moment. Then it was broken by the calls of dinner and the complaints of my stomach, and so I abandoned everything and went to eat. Next morning I was mostly ignored. Most people avoided me, some even apologized. I was pleasantly surprised. For the first time for as far as I could remember, I did not come home with bruises on my arms. In fact, I quite enjoyed my day. I came home to Hamaglob, smiling down at me, and I couldn't have been happier. I pulled out an ant from my pocket who had long died of suffering without air. It went up on the wall with scotch tape, a silent black corpse next to red and white. "I offer thee for you, my lord," I said. I didn't know what compelled me to say that, but the serene, proud smile of Hamaglob convinced me I did something right. The next time I was in my room, the ant vanished, and my luck had improved. I was given a gold star for good behavior. That had never happened before. Usually I was berated and scolded and humiliated in front of my smirking peers. The next day I came home with a rat I caught. Its tail was twitching desperately from side to side. Its legs were kicking out in a futile attempt to get free. Holding the rat up next to my god, I pulled out a pocket knife and slit its throat, letting the warm blood trickle down my arm. In a fit of impulsivity, I smeared some of the blood all over my cheeks. "I hope you like my offering, Lord." I pressed the rat to the mouth of the picture. The animal was still squeaking with every breath and struggling for its life. The cartoon mouth opened impossibly wide. Yellowed teeth gushed with drool. I pressed the head of the rat against its mouth. Its head disappeared into the abyss, followed by everything else, and finally its wriggling tail. Rivulets of crimson dropped down my wall, staining my pillow. For some reason I felt like it wasn't enough. I could hear his teeth gnashing as it chewed, like steel mouse traps. The way pink flesh suddenly lined the crudely drawn mouth, and then disappeared again. His scarlet eyes bored down on me. Disappointment, anger. So, I slipped the knife under my skin, giggling at the onset of pain and how red it glowed underneath. I ran the knife towards my elbow and fed the dislodged skin to Hamaglob, who took it gratefully. My congregation was cheering for me. I got bolder after that. I felt like I could do anything. My parents noticed, of course, and took me to get patched up. The hospital grafted skin from my back onto my wrist, but that was about it. No questions asked, no investigation, no inquiries on who Hamaglob really is. In a way, I got off lucky. Although offering my skin to Hamaglob was done in a fit of impulsivity, I never dared do it again. I reasoned that doing it too many times would attract too much suspicion, but I brought home more vermin as offerings. Rats, cockroaches, the occasional snake. With my determination to appease my Lord Hamaglob, I think I was more effective than my local pest control. If I was lucky, I even brought home a stray cat. To seal my bond, I carved a bloody cross into the palm of my hand. And whenever I had a bad day, I would look at that cross and know everything would be alright. But that one Monday night, even that wasn't enough. It was raining. Lightning slashed the black sky, and the wind was howling and the rain was slamming against the windows. On that particular Monday night, I was in a bad mood. I was picked on again despite Hamaglob's protection. My lunch was stolen and I spent the rest of the day hungry. To make things even worse, I nearly got detention. Dinner was tense that night. You could hear nothing but the scraping of knives against the plates. I glared at my steak, imagining it to be the faces of my bullies. At that precise moment, my older sister Danielle decided to break the silence. She was tall in her age and relatively pretty, a petite face framed with auburn curls. She started babbling on about her new boyfriend who just got into her, and they were going out on a date on Friday night, something like that. A whole string of babble that just floated in and out of my ears. My parents' laughter incensed me. I seethed, wondering why my perfect older sister had such a perfect little life. It was so unfair. I heard nothing but anger roaring through my ears. I wish my sister was dead, or even better, gone. I glared at my steak again, wishing it was my sister's face, and stuffed green peas into my mouth. But when I next looked up, the conversation had abruptly stopped. My parents were quietly eating, not talking. Did Danielle go to the bathroom or something? I was met with puzzled faces. Who are you talking about? Danielle, my sister. Your daughter. You've been our only son as far as we can remember. Are you feeling all right? I stared at them, not believing my ears. Both my parents were grinning back at me, like this was all some sort of joke. Like Danielle would pop up and laugh at what a fool I was. but though their eyes were sincere, their smile was strained. Suddenly my food tasted like sandpaper. "I need to go," I said shakily, standing up. "I have homework." I turned to go, but their voices floated up to me as I was halfway up the stairs, like an angel choir. "Thank the Lord, for He will protect us." I rounded the corner and went into my room, where the rain was still pounding away at my windows like a heartbeat. I turned on my bedroom lights. The room lit up in a pale, sickly glow, but my eyes were drawn to that old drawing Scotch taped to the top of the bed. For starters, it was twice as wide as before, the edges of the paper unfurled beyond the bed. Then Hamaglob had changed positions. He was lounging the full width of the paper, completely relaxed. His crimson skin was radiant, but the most chilling detail was my sister, trapped in his hand. She was frozen in fear, her eyes wide and panicky like a rabbit's, her mouth open in an eternal scream. She was suspended upside down, her hair wild, almost electric, just inches away from his bushy mane and mouth. I scratched at the drawing in vain, but it was as if she was already drawn inside in crayon. Guilt hit me on the head. What have I done? Please, my lord, Hamaglob, I prayed. Let my sister go. I glanced hopefully at the drawing instead, only to find that Danielle's head was fully submerged into his mouth, followed by the rest of her. The last of the screams faded away. Blood spilled outside the edges like the legs of a spider. My lord Hamaglob was grinning back at me in his silly way. "Thank you," he seemed to say. My hands were shaking. My skin was covered in goosebumps. I knew it was all my fault. I knew I had been a horrible brother. All I could think about was her face. It was burned into my mind forever. On Tuesday, I dreaded going to school. The teachers that tormented me, the people that made me miserable. Most important of all, I wanted to stay home and muse on what I had done the previous night, to grieve what was left of my sister. Yet the halls were mostly empty. When I walked into my class, I found a scattering of people inside, mostly the quiet ones, the shy ones that left me alone most of the time. The atmosphere was kind of grim, solemn almost, like I was attending a funeral in the church. Miss Stonestreet walked in, the school principal. "Dear Lord Hamaglob." Her voice was shaky but rehearsed. As she spoke, she gestured wildly with her hands. Her eyes were bulging. Her smile was strained and forced. "Excuse me, miss," I said the moment the prayer was finished. "How can I help you, Benjamin?" Sweat was beading on her face. "What happened to Brandon and Chanel and the rest of them?" She smiled even more uncomfortably. "We got rid of them for you. You never liked them, did you, Benjamin? It is all thanks to our Lord Hamaglob. Praise the Lord." And we spent the rest of the day writing essays on how great Hamaglob really was. The first thing I noticed when I got out of class was that everything was draped in white cloth. Lockers, tables, water coolers. Somebody had painted bloody crosses on them, over and over. Although it was the middle of summer and it was particularly hot the day before, snow was falling as light as a cloud, covering the ground in a soft white blanket. My breath came out foggy as I started my walk back home, although I didn't feel cold at all. The way back was decorated with snow sculptures, all looking like Hamaglob in various poses. His beady eyes smiled as they watched me go home, and each one bore a cross drawn in blood. Finally, I reached my house, standing alone in the middle of the street and bigger than before, partially concealed by snow. In front of the house was a makeshift fence made out of sharp sticks. Spiked on each stick was a head, the head of the people that picked on me. Yes, I could recognize Brandon, Jonathan, and the rest of them. Their faces were too pale and their lips were blue. Their eyes were dug out and snow was collecting in their vacant holes. Blood was still dripping from where the stick pierced their neck, staining the pristine snow crimson. As I walked past them, instinctively feeling my own neck, they creaked their heads around and gave me serene smiles. The house was strangely dark and quiet, save for a flickering candle on a makeshift altar. The only other ornament was a giant photorealistic painting of Hamaglob, lounging on a throne made of skulls. He winked at me as I got closer. Then the silence was broken by chanting, and as I looked around I realized everyone I knew was chanting. My mom, dad, principal, and the quiet kids. All of them wearing the same white robe and straw slippers with a bloody cross messily painted on the sides. As I listened, the chants sounded less like human voices and more like hissing. "We love you, O Lord Hamaglab. Please forgive us." For some reason, I was tempted to join in, to worship the Lord Hamaglab, which I had made. Then the vision was broken, and all at once I saw nightmares. My head on the stick, my body between his teeth. Hamaglab grinned at me, warm, beckoning. My skin cracked, and I could see the cross engraved inside. Repeating over and over, "You belong to me," he seemed to say. I forced myself to look away. I ran, took the nearest cab, and forced myself as far away as I could. He's always here though. Every night I see his cross on my walls, no matter which motel I stay in. Every night I see him in my dreams, his ever-growing smile. He is waiting for me to return. Forever. Several months ago, my partner and I moved into our first apartment. It was small and simple, 2 bedrooms, a decent-sized bathroom with a clean shower, and a small living room that connected directly with an even smaller kitchen. We were in love with it on day one. Those first few weeks getting used to our new home were some of the best days of my life. Finally being out from under the noses of our parents and starting our life together was something I'd been looking forward to for what felt like ages. For a while, everything seemed too good to be true. But then one night, I woke up with a painful need for the bathroom. I laid there for a bit, trying to tell my body to suck it up and wait just a few more hours. After several minutes of hopelessly tossing around in an attempt to get comfortable, it became clear that the floodgates would soon open past the point of no return. I grumpily forced my tired legs out of bed and headed to the bathroom. After I was done with my business, I groggily fell back into bed next to my partner and yawned from exhaustion. Tears stung my eyes as a result and distorted the room into a series of blurred colors and shadows. Annoyed by the slight inconvenience, I wiped the wet from my face. In doing so, my eyes came to rest on the bedroom doorway. Suddenly, I felt sleep release me from its temptation as I stared puzzled at the door frame. Something about it looked odd, but without my glasses I couldn't quite make it out. I reached to my nightstand and searched blindly for my lenses, not taking my eyes off the entrance to our room. After a few seconds of struggling, I managed to grab hold of my glasses and put them on. I have never regretted anything more in my life. It took a moment for my eyes to align to the sudden shock of visibility, but as they did, a chill, like cold liquid dripped down my back. I saw peeking around the door frame a shape. Just a thin section of the side of a large head poked out into the bedroom. Along with it, a pitch-black limb reached around the frame and held it intimately. Despite not being able to make out any clear features on the dark shape, I knew it was looking back at me. I screamed and immediately turned on the light to reveal what was obviously an intruder, only to be met with the abrupt emptiness of my bedroom entrance. Confused, but still very much alarmed, I got back out of bed and grabbed the knife I kept in the bedside drawer. I walked cautiously over to the door, weapon ready in case I needed to defend myself. I waited, pressed against the wall, listening for any unusual sounds coming from the apartment. When I heard none, it gave me the courage to whip around into the doorway, only to see nothing. The hallway was completely empty and all the doors were shut. I slowly moved down the small hall until I reached the living room, where I was once again greeted by no other presence. I sighed in relief. I thought I had just imagined the dark shape. After double-checking the other room and the bathroom just to be safe, I found nothing out of the ordinary. I reasoned that my sleepy mind had just played a trick on me, so I returned to bed once more and looked back at the doorway. I didn't see the figure this time and after not long fell back to sleep. The next day, I decided not to share the previous night's excursion with my partner. There was no reason they needed to know about some weird hallucination. After all, I went through the day like nothing happened. the mundane of my usual activities scrubbing away the event, until I nearly forgotten about it entirely. It wasn't until night fell when I was laying in bed next to my sleeping partner again that the memory came back to me. I bolted upright and stared at the entrance to my bedroom once again. This time, however, it was deserted. I could see only the beige chipping paint peeling gently from the frame. Relieved and feeling a bit ridiculous, I chuckled silently to myself and looked down at my partner, whose slumbering form hadn't stirred even slightly. The peaceful image brought a tiredness to my eyes, and I opted to rest my head on the feather pillow beside them and share in that peace. Soon enough, I was asleep. Sometime later, I awoke without warning. I noticed I'd been so distracted before that I'd fallen asleep with my glasses still wrapped around my indented and weary face. I sat up with a fatigued, quiet sigh of mild annoyance and reached to my face to remove the crooked rims, but as my hand grazed their edges, I opened my eyes a little just by chance and was greeted with a recognizable shape lingering just at the edge of my doorway. My stomach sank like a stone and my abdomen curled and twisted like a coiling serpent as anxiety flooded my veins. There was no mistaking it this time. Impregnating the entrance stood a dark figure, its horrible misshapen form peeking through the edges of the door frame. I once again sat there in stunned silence, only able to return the thing's faceless peeping with my own horrified gaze. I've no idea how long our staring contest lasted, but after what I guess was several minutes, I noticed just a little more of what I thought to be the thing's face was revealed. I could now see what appeared to be half of an unusually inflated, bulbous, human-like head leering at me through the doorway. I then realized its entire crooked arm now reached past the frame, resting a sharp and jagged hand against the bedroom wall. I didn't take the time to observe any more of the thing's hideous form, and instead reached for my knife. I did so super slow and with an unshifting gaze, the thought of making any sudden movements filling my heart with a paranoid dread. As soon as my hand grasped the handle of the tool, I flipped it open with a low click and brought it in front of myself. Almost immediately, the pattern of horror that stared me down reacted, but not in the way I thought. Rather than rush at me with a fearsome howl or vicious anger, it quickly pulled its gnarled appendage and bulging head back through the doorway, leaving a confused emptiness where it had formerly stood. I almost screamed in surprise and found myself hastily jumping from my bed and storming to the door as if to chase the thing. But as I stepped through the doorway and down the hall just like the previous night, I found not so much as a dust particle out of place. Unlike the last time, however, I was certain I wasn't imagining things and made little effort to be quiet with my search of the apartment. My stomping feet and slamming of doors unsurprisingly woke my partner, who asked me what was wrong with a tone more irritated than concerned. I can't say I blame them since my exasperated explanation was unable to describe properly what I'd seen. After double-checking the locks on both the front door and all the windows, as well as searching every room and closet in the apartment, my partner could only conclude that I had some sort of sleep paralysis episode. I tried to explain to them that I'd reached for the knife while watching the shape and therefore couldn't have possibly been asleep, but I think their exhaustion clouded their better judgment. They shook off my concerns and told me to come back to bed. I begrudgingly did so, but only because we had basically ripped our home apart to ensure there were no hiding intruders. I didn't do much throughout the following day, my focus remaining on the entity from the previous night. With my partner being gone to work and leaving me alone, my nerves refused to settle. I kept myself in the living room and close to the front door, in case I needed to escape something that might materialize from the shadows that stretched and twisted perfidiously down the length of my dimly lit hallway. I found it nearly impossible to stop myself from regularly glancing toward the bedroom, each time expecting to see that malignant shape peeking around its entrance. The place that had once brought me the comfort of a prominent life and a promising future now replaced the very marrow in my bones with a turbulent angst. As the daylight coming through the blinds softened, my paranoia only got worse, but the image of my partner finally arriving back through the front door brought me at least some amenity. Soon, however, the sun slipped over the mountains. The shadows formerly cast upon the walls began to meld with the increasing darkness of the apartment, and I slowly began to feel less reassured by the thought of my partner's return. They should have been home over an hour before. I shuddered at the possibility that this would be one of those rare evenings when work kept them late. Sadly, a disheartening phone call from my partner confirmed my fear, as they told me in no uncertain terms that they likely wouldn't be relieved until quite late into the night. I tried not to make the dread that overtook me known to them as we spoke. I attempted to hold them on the line longer than what their employer was probably happy with, but inevitably, the conversation had to end. And when it did, I found myself alone once more. Trepidation wrapped itself around my throat like a knotted rope as I stared down the hall to my bedroom. My home suddenly felt like a prison of drywall and cheap, shabby furniture. It was getting late and I wasn't sure what I feared more: being alone in the bedroom where that thing might watch me again, or not being alone in the hallway with it. My only hope was that the horror wouldn't show itself that night, but truthfully I had little reason to believe that. After a day of constantly looking over my shoulder in a ceaseless paranoia, I found myself frustrated that I no longer felt welcome in my own home. I couldn't allow some delusion or nightmare, or whatever this thing was, to take away the sanctuary my partner and I waited so long to acquire. So it was with a flimsy resolve that I opted to go to sleep in my bed in my bedroom. Although, I decided it would be best to shut the door and lock it in the hopes of bringing myself a little more confidence. It must have been exhaustion from the day's obsessive stress that cradled me into slumber that night. Despite my incessant fear, I somehow managed a few hours of sleep. However, I was awoken to the sound of a light knocking at the bedroom door. I groggily checked the time and realized it must be my partner, home from work at last. I sighed, a bit relieved, as I forced my body out of the comfort of bed. As I rose, the knocking came again, a little more insistently this time. Slightly irritated, I sleepily announced to my caller to wait a moment. As I was coming, I rubbed the tiredness from my eyes as I walked those few short steps to the door, all the while the perpetual knocking tapped away at it. I again, more loudly this time, announced I was coming, and wrapped my hand around the doorknob, preparing to twist its lock and open it. But as soon as my fingers grazed the brass, a heavy bang hit the door so hard the hinges rattled. I jumped back, fear abruptly sobering me. My gaze transfixed on the door, like I was trying to see through it. I weakly called my partner's name. Whomever was on the other side responded with another slam against the hardboard. I let out a small yelp as the thin strand of resolve I'd had earlier that night evaporated completely. Another slam pounded the door and I watched as a screw flew off one of the hinges. I ran to the door and pressed myself into it with all my weight, hoping to soften the bludgeoning. It rattled again, the force of which nearly threw me off. I planted my feet as hard as possible on the old carpet and kept pushing against my intruder on the other side. With another loud bang, more shrapnel shot out from the hinges as I desperately tried to keep the door in its frame. I heard the sound of splintering wood and loose, swinging hinges as the attacker continued to assault the barrier between us. I screamed in panic and primitive instinct as I felt the door weaken with each devastating blow. My eyes wildly scanned the small room for anything that could offer protection. I wasn't strong enough to move any of the heavy furniture, and even if I had been, there wasn't enough time to do so. Finally, my distressed gaze landed on my bedside knife. I knew it wouldn't offer much protection against whatever the hell was destroying the door, but as cracks began to form in the wood, I saw little other choice. After guarding against one last slam of the door, I tore myself away from it and ran to the far side of the bed where my small protective item rested. Grabbing it, I turned to face the door, which continued to pound against the now awkwardly misshapen hinges that barely held on. With one final crash, the door flew open and smashed against the wall with a heavy crack, driving the knob clean through it. I expected to see the full form of some kind of monster standing murderously in the entrance, but instead there was just that, a doorway, completely desolate of either person or monstrosity. In spite of this, my nerves did not settle. The sight of the empty doorway only brought concern for my sanity as my mind grasped frantically for any kind of explanation to the damn door practically flying off its hinges. I had little time to consider the possibilities. However, For only seconds later, the answer revealed itself to me. An absurdly large, swollen black head slowly pushed its way into the room and twisted in a nearly human-like manner until the front of its horrible form rested an eyeless gaze upon me. A deep dread slithered its way up my spine as I glared in horror at the void that I assumed was a face. Through all the terror that choked my psyche, my arm somehow found the will to lift my hand and point the blade of my small knife toward the intruder. Its immense pitch-black appendage shifted downward and tilted slightly, as if pondering the significance of my weapon. Then with a sudden, bone-snapping jerk, it lifted its featureless visage to meet my tear-stained face once more. The egregious thing seemed to examine me with amusement, as its mangled arm kneaded softly at the wall of the room. My legs shook and my heart pounded so intensely I thought it had burst from my chest cavity. Although I held the knife in front of my shivering self, I had not the strength to otherwise move. The corner of the room became my entire world, my very life relying solely on the space that existed between myself and my anathema. My eyes peeled further wide as the entity's engorged skull began to shape and contort. I watched in agonizing terror as the face's center stretched and tore disgustingly into a hole, like a lipless jaw trying to scream, the flaps of gore-ridden. Skin separated just enough for red gums and yellow teeth to faintly show through the tears. A guttural moan exhaled from the fissures in a tangle of high and low pitches, stealing the last ounce of my resolve. My quivering hands dropped the knife and I fell with it to the floor with a painful thud. I let out a small sob as snot and other fluid dripped down from my face. The realization that I was going to die gripped my wrenching throat, as a horrifying series of voices echoed through the many openings of the abomination. It was like the thing was trying to form speech, but hadn't done so in centuries. Its form struggled and convulsed as grotesque belches and groans clawed their way violently out of its many orifices. Finally, after a tortuous effort, the thing managed to weave the words, gnarled and disgusting, from its awful face. It screeched in rage-filled overlapping tones. Never again, understand. My eyes focused on the monster with both increased horror and confusion, and I found myself nodding in acknowledgement. It kept that horrible form in an eyeless stare as if considering my response. Then, after a moment or so, it slowly slipped back beyond the door frame and out of sight. I sat there dumbfounded, the horror not yet entirely dissolved. Only a minute later I heard the front door open, soon followed by a shocking gasp. My partner ran into the room to see me, soaked in snot and tears, kneeling in the corner. The knife lay a foot or so in front of me, and they picked it up gingerly. They lowered themselves to my eye level and grabbed my shoulders, half hugging, half shaking me while saying what had happened. A vacancy plastered my wet face as I simply told them, "Burglary." I don't really know why I didn't tell the truth. I guess I just knew they wouldn't believe me. I suppose I don't really expect anyone to. Needless to say, after the incident I convinced my partner to move out of that place. After seeing the sight of the smashed-in bedroom door, it didn't take much to convince them. We spent the week rapidly moving everything out during the day and sleeping at my parents' house at night. They didn't mind us staying with them after hearing about what had happened. A few weeks later, we managed to find another apartment, though it wasn't as nice as our previous one. I was hoping to be able to let go of what happened in the old place. I just wanted to move on and forget about it. I honestly thought I did, until last night. I got to bed shortly after my partner had fallen asleep. I looked at the empty entrance to our new bedroom, studying it for a moment. This had become routine in the weeks since everything happened. Thankfully, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I rested my head on the soft pillow and began to doze off when a strange sensation came over me. I tried to swallow it down and force myself to sleep. In time, however, my nosiness and concern got the better of me, and I opened my eyes just enough to peek between the lids. Focusing on the doorway, there, peeking back at me from just around the frame was a bulbous, dark head. The trouble started a week ago when I started playing around with one of those AI image generators that's been floating around on the internet. Normally I would stay away from such things because I have a deep resentment towards anything to do with AI or deep fakes and the like. I find it all repulsive. Once while scrolling through Instagram, I saw a Tom Cruise impressionist who had put a deep fake of the actor's face onto his own. It was startling and disturbing. It wasn't how much he looked like the real Tom Cruise that bothered me. It was how much he didn't look like the real thing. He looked like something, wearing another man's face. But people in the comment sections were eating it up and some even believed he was Tom Cruise. A lot of them believed it. Couldn't they see how fake it all was? And how wrong it was for that impressionist to put another person's face over his own? I can't help but think something bad is going to come of all this one day for our society. Not that it matters much for me. I'm probably going to be dead soon. No, not probably. I'm sure of it. The AI image generator hooked me. It was simple. You give it a prompt and it will produce an image of that prompt. I had seen similar AI generators in the past, but what astounded me about this one is how specific the prompt could be. How the AI could produce almost anything you thought of it in great detail. The images I saw floating online made me laugh, so I decided to bite the bullet. Sure, the Tom Cruise thing was creepy, as was the potential for that kind of technology in the wrong hands. But this was harmless fun. Not even remotely the same sort of thing. A stupid generator making stupid images for you. When I brought up the site, I sat long and hard thinking about the first prompt I wanted to give the generator. Then I remembered a story my father told me once about how when he was in college he visited Karachi, Pakistan with his world studies class. He told me that one night when he and his classmates were walking around the city, they came across a man who was playing chess with a dog. Not pretending to play, but really playing with him. My father told me that when they walked past the man again an hour later, that the man was shaking his head, that he looked frustrated, defeated, but that the dog looked happy, grinning even. The dog had apparently won. I typed dog playing chess into the generator and hit enter. It started loading, and after a few minutes the generator produced an image. It was an image of a dog playing chess. It even had a stupid smile on its face. I laughed. A stupid generator making stupid images. I told myself I would only spend a few more minutes playing, but those minutes quickly turned into an hour. And when I looked at the clock, I noticed I had spent almost 2 hours and 30 minutes playing around with the generator. I won't waste your time by showing you all the images I made. They're as banal and dumb as you'd expect. I was about to close the tab when another prompt came into my head. If I told you this prompt came out of nowhere, that would be a lie. I know exactly where it came from. It came from the fact that about 3 months ago, one of my co-workers had died. His name was Jeremy. He was a good guy and had even managed to get promoted in my office despite only working there for a couple months at that point. Jeremy was what you would call a real go-getter. The kind of guy who gave it 110% at all phases in his life. He had big aspirations to go along with the big cup of coffee he drank every morning. A cup that had "World's Best Jeremy" written on it. And all that was wiped out when he forgot to look both ways while crossing the road. He got taken out by a semi-truck. Jeremy's death struck me hard not just because it was the death of a fellow co-worker, but because it made me realize how fragile life is. If a guy like Jeremy could get taken out, what did that mean for someone like me? How much borrowed time was a schmuck like me really on? If Jeremy had only looked both ways, or if he had somehow known what was going to happen before it happened. I typed "how am I going to die" into the generator and hit enter. The generator started loading, and kept loading, and loading. It was taking a very long time, much longer than all the other prompts. I began to feel foolish, thinking I had finally managed to give it a broken prompt. I mean, of course I did. It had been a profoundly stupid prompt. There was no way the generator could know how. It produced an image. It was an image of an old man in a yellow hat. I laughed when I saw it, though it wasn't the same kind of laughter that the other generated images had gotten out of me. It was nervous laughter, scared laughter. Maybe you would laugh too when you looked at the image, right? Be honest. It's okay. It's just a stupid generator producing stupid images. After all, Still, the image did bother me. The old man's frown, those sunken eyes, and that pale complexion. In the back of my head, I thought of that creepy Tom Cruise deepfake, how the comments were convinced of its legitimacy. I decided I had had enough and closed the tab. My prompt had simply confused the generator, and it had produced a random incoherent image. That's all. It had been stupid for me to even ask the damn question in the first place. What had I expected? An actual answer. Obviously, an AI generator had no idea how I was going to die. I saw the old man the very next day. This was 6 days ago. I had been doing errands downtown and had quickly forgotten about the image from the night before. It had faded away from my memory like a bad dream. It was an overcast day and it looked like a really big storm was coming. I could see huge purple clouds in the distance. As I was walking to my car, I got this uncomfortable feeling that someone was watching me. I looked back. I saw the old man in the yellow hat. It was unmistakably him. He had the same bright yellow hat, the same deep frown, the pale skin, and those horrible sunken eyes. He was across the street and he was staring at me. No, that's not it. He was glaring at me, and his hands were opening and closing in a slow, violent motion. He began to walk towards me. He walked in a strange manner, like someone who had never walked before and was only just learning how, like something that was only pretending to be human, pretending to wear an old man's face. And I spotted a funny thing. No one else noticed him. People walked past him without giving him a second glance. As he crossed the road, I thought for sure he was going to get hit by a car, but he weaved through traffic like some grotesque version of Frogger, and no driver paid him any mind, not even a single honk. Morbidly, I thought of Jeremy getting hit by that semi. There was one other person that noticed him. It was a little girl who looked right at the old man and then began crying. The little girl's mom looked up to see if she could spot what had caused her daughter to become so distraught, but not once did her eyes land on the old man. He walked past her like a ghost, and as he got closer to me, that deep frown began to turn upwards into a horrible grin. I dropped my groceries, got in my car, and drove straight home. On the way, I told myself I had only been seeing things. When I got home, I immediately locked all the doors and bolted for my room. I brought up the AI generator and again asked it, how am I going to die? I needed the generator to produce a new image. I needed it to show me that the image of the old man had just been a random image it had conjured and that now it would do that again. It would create something completely random, because it didn't understand my question, couldn't have possibly understood my question, couldn't have possibly shown me anything real, and certainly couldn't have shown me how I was going to die. It produced the same image of the old man. I asked it again. Same image. I asked it about 50 more times, and every time it was the same image of the old man in the yellow hat. Stupid generator making stupid images. Right, only that thing that had been walking towards me hadn't been stupid. That thing looked very real, and very terrifying. I haven't left my house since that day. 2 nights ago, I saw the old man outside my bedroom window glaring at me. Last night I heard him try the front door, then walk around back and try the back door. Today I brought up the generator and typed, how do I stop the old man in the yellow hat? It started loading, and then immediately replied, too much traffic, try again later. But I know if I try again, I'll just get the same response. It's not going to tell me. I am paralyzed by fear. Paralyzed by those sunken eyes and ghostly complexion. I can hear him outside right now as I type. He's been there the entire time. He's walking around the back of the house. He just tried the back door again. Shout out to my superfans Sweet Black Swan and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.